Netanyahu has been cracking down on independent media in Israel for more than a decade now.
Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm Diana Falzone, a senior reporter at Mediaite.
And I'm Aidan McLaughlin, the editor-in-chief of Mediaite. For this week's episode, we are joined by Barak Ravid, a political reporter and Middle East expert for Axios. He covers foreign policy and the 2024 election. Barak also writes for Walla News in Israel and is the author of Trump's Peace, a book about the Trump administration, Israel, and the Abraham Accords. Recently, he joined CNN as a political and foreign policy analyst.
We spoke with Barak about the Israel-Hamas war, the media landscape in Israel, and what comes next in the conflict. Here it is.
Barak, thanks so much for coming on the interview.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Let's start with some of your latest reporting. You just reported about a meeting between the United States and Israel in which Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, told Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his war cabinet that the war in Gaza needs to transition to a, quote, lower intensity phase in a matter of weeks. Tell us about that meeting.
I think it was much more meaningful than I thought at the beginning, because it was a whole day of meetings. And I think overall, Sullivan sat with Netanyahu in different formats, something like 5 hours, maybe more. It was really an opportunity to talk about not only the war right now on the ground, but also like strategically where this thing is going. And I think that one of the issues that again, it is a disagreement between Israel and the US, but it's not a strategic one, it's a tactical one. And this is, when is this war moving from, what Israeli officials call the high intensity fighting or high intensity operations, that this means 3 armored and infantry divisions in Gaza, tens of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of tanks, you name it. When are we moving from this? And because this is what we've been seeing for the last more than a month now, when are we moving from this to low-intensity fighting, low-intensity operation, which means most of the soldiers get out of the cities in Gaza, go, redeploy around the border, and then every day, a small force is going in on a very specific commando mission to try and get a Hamas leader, or to try and destroy a tunnel, or destroy a headquarters, or destroy a weapons cache, something like that. So where are we moving from the high intensity phase to the low intensity phase? And the US would love this to happen as soon as possible. And the Americans told the Israelis that they would rather this thing to happen before the end of the year, sometime, between Christmas and New Year's. The Israelis want this to happen closer to the end of January. So we're talking about basically an argument over three to 4 weeks, which is relatively tactical. The bigger argument and the bigger gap and disagreement right now is about the day after, meaning when you finish with the high intensity phase, what's going to happen in Gaza 2 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now? And on that, I think both sides at the moment see things quite differently.
Right. So it's interesting to track the evolution of the Biden administration's views on this. They were initially, after the horrors of October 7th, pretty unconditionally supportive of Israel. And 2 months later, we now have the result of that, which is this horrific bombing campaign. And, no matter what source you cite, there are thousands of innocent people dead in the Gaza Strip, the vast majority of them women and children. And now we have the Biden administration putting some pressure on Israel to rein in the war. And also, as you note, some pressure on Israel to explain what the aftermath looks like. How has that pressure been received by the Israeli government? Are they upset by the administration trying to pressure them into handling this war in a certain way, or are they understanding that they need the United States on their side if they're going to prosecute this war in the way that they want to?
So first, the answer is no doubt the latter, meaning Joe Biden has a lot of leverage on the Israeli government because he's giving the weapons, he's giving the backing in the UN, the US veto in the Security Council. And more than everything, Joe Biden is the most popular politician in Israel right now. And you know what? I'll rephrase. Joe Biden is the most popular politician in Israel ever. Okay? And this gives him a lot of leverage. And Netanyahu knows it. Therefore, Netanyahu does not have a lot of room to maneuver when it comes to what Joe Biden is asking. I'm not sure I agree with you, but that what we see now on the ground is the result of, the backing that Joe Biden gave Israel. I think that we would see, again, I don't know if we would have been now after 60 days or if it was sooner. I don't know. It's hypothetical. But I think that if anything, at least in the first few weeks of the war, I know it sounds strange and might upset some people, but things could have been much worse. Okay, and I think that Biden managed to influence Israeli tactics in the first few weeks of the war, especially how the ground invasion,
right, by delaying or pushing to delay the ground invasion.
Not only delaying it, at the end, the ground operation was done at the beginning with two infantry and armor divisions, then a third one joined, but the original idea was to do it with 9, okay? And then there was idea to do it with 6, and at the end it happened with 3. So I know it sounds strange to say because, still there's huge damage in Gaza, thousands of people dead, but it could have been worse. People have to realize that. Second, when it comes to humanitarian aid into Gaza, if not for Joe Biden, I'm not sure that we would see what we see right now, which is still not enough. But again, it could have been worse. No. And the Israeli cabinet just a few minutes ago approved a decision that completely shifted Israeli policy when it comes to Israel's connection with the Gaza Strip. On October 7th, Israel decided to cut all ties with Gaza, not to let any water in, not to let any fuel in, not to let any aid trucks in from Israeli territory. Okay, all the aid since October 7th came through Egypt. Today, Israel, for the first time since the war started, agreed to open a border crossing with Gaza to allow trucks in. This is a dramatic shift in policy, and it wouldn't have happened if Israel did not need to maintain Joe Biden's support. So I think, again, situation in Gaza is very bad, but it could have been worse.
I want to talk about the media landscape in Israel. You worked as a reporter there for years. Could you give us a lay of the land of the media landscape there? There's broad ideological diversity among news outlets. What does the Israeli media look like?
It's funny that you say that, because if you ask Netanyahu, he will tell you that all the Israeli media, almost all the Israeli media is the same. They're all left wing. They're all liberals. They're all against him. They're all, right. You have the same stuff here. Right. And it's interesting because I think that since the beginning of the war, what we saw is, first, obviously, people watch television much more. It's pretty obvious. But what we saw is that there was some sort of a decline in the ratings of a news channel, TV channel in Israel called Channel 14. And Channel 14 is the equivalent of One American News here in Israel. And I'm not expressing any opinion. It's a fact. It's very similar. Um, and the ratings of Channel 14 that backs Netanyahu 100%, it's a Netanyahu mouthpiece.
Right. To the point of
The
almost being
ratings,
propaganda, I assume you'd say.
again, that's an opinion.
Right.
I don't want to, it's like I have my opinions about Channel 14, but it's not relevant. Factually, it's a
Right.
Netanyahu mouthpiece. There's almost zero criticism of Netanyahu and his policies in the shows, in the news shows in this channel, which is the news shows, which is a channel that was established at the beginning as a channel for shows that deal almost like a religion channel, what we call here like a Jewish tradition channel. That was supposed to be and then it morphed into a almost 24/7 news channel and talk show, political talk shows that are all super conservative, but it's not even super conservative. It's just pro Netanyahu. It's not even because you will not see in this channel, for example, people who are right wing but do not support Netanyahu. It's like
Right.
It's not like the John Boltons of Israel will not appear there. Okay, they will not get them on the air. And the ratings went down. It was, lately it changed a bit, but overall, not only the ratings but the share. Okay, the share went down. The share of the overall, viewership, and it was very interesting because people sort of, I think, just didn't like or less like the sort of rhetoric that they saw there and wanted something else. And I think it was a sign also through the ratings, a sign of sort of the political changes in Israel since this war started.
Just what would that rhetoric be that they were seeing on Channel 14?
I'll give you an example. There was quite early in the war, it was an amazing television moment. A brother of one of the women who was, badly wounded in the October 7th massacre, she was at the hospital. Her brother came to see her, and he went on TV on Channel 14. And you know how sometimes you get somebody on the air because you think you sort of like profile him, and you think that he's going to say something, and then he goes on the air, he says something completely different. Okay, and he just went on the air, started attacking the government and Netanyahu. And he's a brother of someone who was just wounded in the most horrific attack in Israel's history, and you saw how the anchor didn't know what to do, and at the end he just basically ended the interview with him because he didn't know what to do. I'll give you another example. There are demonstrations of the families of the hostages. Okay, Channel 14 almost does not cover it, as if it doesn't exist. Because it is most of those demonstrations are critical of the government. It brings on the air only the relatives of hostages that are not critical of the government. Okay, it's not 100%, but it's almost. Okay, so you see it very well, and it's it's sort of strange because it's the hostage issue is a huge story. It's not like it's one of the biggest stories of the war, and to sort of not cover big parts of it is, journalistically is, it's not done, which I think gives you an idea about what's going on there.
Now, meanwhile, I want to talk about the there has been some, we reported it over here. There's been some threats to crack down on the press in Israel. You had Israel's communication minister who called for a crackdown on Haaretz, where you used to work, and he accused the paper of defeatist and false propaganda, taking a harmful line that undermines the goals of the war, which is never something you want to hear in wartime, a government saying about a news outlet. What do you think about your former paper's coverage of the Netanyahu government, and is there a climate of censorship in Israel from the government since October 7th?
Look, I think there are, Netanyahu has been cracking down on independent media in Israel for more than a decade now. Okay, his trial is partially because of his attempts to control the media. Okay, that's a big part of his trial, and I think that a lot of things that the government has been trying to do is to crack down on free speech since the war started. Under different explanations. I'll give you an example. The Israeli police, for weeks, did not allow a certain group of Arab citizens of Israel to demonstrate against the war. It is still trying to prevent such demonstrations, which is, a huge violation of freedoms and civil rights. So I think that parts of the government are trying to do that. Can anybody sincerely, try and harm the press in Israel right now? Honestly, and I don't think so. Especially not this guy who's a buffoon. Everybody treats him like that. It's all for domestic consumption.
Right.
There's in the current government, you cannot pass, if they try to really pass such laws, the government will, the unity government will fall apart. Netanyahu will still be the prime minister with a full right-wing government, but I don't think he wants that at the moment. So I don't think those things are going anywhere in the immediate term. And the Israeli press is, I'm telling you, it is, again, I have a lot of criticism about a lot of things in the Israeli press, but I think it is very, very hard-hitting. And it's not, sometimes I would rather see other things, but is the Israeli media speaking truth to power? Definitely. Is it doing it enough? Not always. But I don't think that the media landscape in Israel is such that is, controlled by the government or anything like that, just because it's just, it's just very, very strong. And I think that the public, especially after what we had in the 9 months before the war, the big demonstrations against the constitutional coup that Netanyahu was trying to push, I think it also strengthened the independent media, independent press in Israel very much. And so I think that when the war started, the Israeli press was in a much stronger position than it's been, let's say, a year before. But still, do I think that the Israeli press can be more critical, for example, about things that are happening in Gaza? No doubt. I don't think the Israeli media covers enough what's going on in Gaza. Definitely not in prime time and not in prominent places within the news shows. I think that's a problem. Is the Israeli media taking things, or at least is it asking enough questions about the IDF? I would want to see more. It's asking a lot, but I would want to see more on certain issues, especially on issues of civilian casualties. But still, I think there was just just the other day, an issue of this soldier, Israeli soldier, reserve soldier, who, not in Gaza, but in the West Bank, went into a mosque and started singing Hanukkah songs from the mosque's audio system, and he was kicked out by the IDF, and he was kicked out because the Israeli media covered the story quite extensively. And I think that this was I was happy to see that this thing got a lot of coverage, because it's not easy to, in the middle of a war, when 80% of the Israeli public supports the war and supports the military and all of that, to run such stories. Also, the intelligence failure, the amount of coverage that this issue got, in the Israeli press, was pretty amazing. Already in the first few days after the war, there already been stories reported about the intelligence failure, and stories with deep reporting about what happened behind the scenes, and including pointing fingers at people like the head of military intelligence and the head of Shin Bet and the IDF chief of staff. And this is, I'm talking to you about, it was in the second week of the war. So I think it is, the Israeli media has been pretty hard hitting. Can it do more? Sometimes it can, but overall, during the worst war Israel has had since its founding, I'm not sure that any other democratic country would have such independent media in such a situation.
It's been extremely difficult to get verified information from within the Gaza Strip. That's been a particularly contentious issue when it comes to the casualty numbers, which are provided by the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. How much credence do you, as a seasoned journalist, give to the information shared by the health ministry?
It's a great question. And, we talked about it a lot also internally in Axios. And it's a question. At the end of the day, I think that as journalists, sometimes you report what you have. And in the situation that we have in Gaza, where a terror group is in control of this piece of land, and it's not only a terror group, but it's also the government. At the end of the day, that's what you have. I mean, what can you do? Okay, and I think it is clear to everybody, and it's been written in almost every article that was written about this, that those are the numbers that a government ministry that's controlled by Hamas is giving. So I think that, or at least I want to hope that the public that reads this is conscious enough of the situation and doesn't take everything face value. I don't think we shouldn't report the numbers because it's from the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. Those are the numbers we have. We report them. By the way, to be honest, I did not get any number from the Israeli side that was dramatically different. Every person, obviously, every person's life is precious and important and everything, but it's not like the Israelis are saying, it's not 18,000 people who got killed, it's 8,000. That's not the case. We're talking about, I don't know, pretty small numbers that differ. So it's and I think what I think should be reported more, and I don't think is reported enough, is that when you say 18,000 people, it doesn't mean that it's 80,000 people who are not involved in the fighting. Okay, it's at least Israeli estimates are there. 7,000 of those killed are Hamas militants. Again, I don't know if that's the accurate number, but I'm sure it's not very far from that. So I think it is something that, while we need to, I think we have to, because that's what we have. We have to report about what the numbers that are going out of Gaza, even if it's from Hamas, we also need to, at the same time, say that according to the Israelis, that and that number are people who were, Hamas militants.
Yeah, it's funny, as you note, at the beginning of this, when we started getting the casualty numbers, I remember there was a lot of media, criticism that I thought was very tedious about crediting the Hamas-run health ministry for these numbers, but they were the only numbers we had. So it was either we pretended that we didn't have any information, or we reported on these numbers. And as you note,
I give you even a more contentious example.
Yeah,
the bombing of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this was like a huge, and I understand why it was a huge issue, because the first headlines of it were not accurate.
Right.
Okay, it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is denying it. Okay, but at the end of the day, during war, under the fog of war, in the pace things are happening during a war, it's hard to cover it as a journalist. It's hard. I'm telling you, I've been doing this for almost 20 years. It's hard. Okay. So again, we can argue about this word in the headline, that word in the headline, but at the end of the day, the media reports what it has. It does not report what it doesn't have.
Right.
And it's almost like, people saying, why don't you report this and that? Yeah, we don't report it because we don't know if it's...
We don't know it.
We don't know that.
Right.
Okay, or not that we don't know that. We don't have any information that says that.
Mm.
Okay?
Yeah.
And if, and by the way, in the case of the hospital, you saw that within minutes, when there was more information, okay, the coverage changed. And I don't think, there was this thing, that they took like headlines in the New York Times or I don't know where, I can remember, and saw how the same event, the same incident had like 4 or 5 headlines. Of course it has 4 or 5 headlines because we're in 2023. We're not in 1945 when the paper comes out once a day.
Once a day.
And, when things develop, things are also updated.
Right.
And I don't think the alternative is let's not report it and wait 5 hours until everything is clear and only then report it. If there's anyone who's suggesting that, then I don't think he's living in the reality of 2023.
Right, and how the media works. Yeah, you report what you can, and you attribute it clearly to whoever's claiming it, especially in a conflict when you have to give attribution. Now, one of the issues that we've had in this conflict is access to Gaza. Your now colleague at CNN, Clarissa Ward, who's a great reporter, she's been on here before to talk about her reporting in Ukraine. She just delivered a really harrowing and vital dispatch from Gaza. She was able to access Gaza despite a block on journalists from entering without the IDF. Do you think that Israel should open up Gaza to foreign journalists?
I think it's obvious that the answer is yes. I mean, there's no. I think it's clear. Would I, would I go if I'm a journalist working for an international media outlet, and if someone like that come to me and ask me, should I go to Gaza on my own, just go to Rafah crossing, cross the border, and just hang out? I wouldn't do that.
Not for you.
Okay, I wouldn't do that. It's like it's not like people go to Ukraine, which is a huge country. We're talking about a very small piece of land. When the fighting is super, super intense, this is very dangerous. Okay, yep. Again, everyone makes their own decisions. For me personally, I think it's just too dangerous. I think with Clarissa.
Clarissa said there's nowhere is safe in there, and Ukraine, you have
exactly.
This is like Kiev where there's no fighting, but not in Gaza.
Exactly.
Right.
And with Clarissa, she went to southern Gaza, where the Emiratis has established a field hospital, and this is the area where is, again, it's not safe, but it's let's say, less intense fighting. Okay, and even that is super dangerous. Okay, and obviously she couldn't go northern from there because that's really it's a suicide mission. Like go to Gaza City or to those places. It's just, in my opinion, again, I don't recommend any reporter to do that at the moment. It's just, in my opinion, just far too dangerous.
Yeah. And with that said, this war has been one of the bloodiest on record for journalists. More than 60 are reported to have been killed so far in the bombing. Is there concern in Israel about how that looks on the world stage?
I think it's, again, I don't think anybody in Israel is happy that 60 journalists were killed. But, I don't think it's, this war is much, much, much bigger than I think a lot of people understand. For Israel, for the average Israeli, okay, I'm now talking about the average Israeli. 80% of Israelis support the war. Okay, 80%. The same number support kicking out Netanyahu once the war ends. Okay, which is, when you think about it,
crazy.
It's
yeah. It's like that there's so much support for the war, but not the leader who is doing the war.
Exactly, because the leader who's doing the war is blamed for responsibility for the failure that led to the war. Okay, so, but for the average Israeli, what happened on October 7th is so, it touched the most sensitive nerves in Israeli psyche. Okay, and the historian Yuval Noah Harari, that I don't know how many of the people watching this now know him, but he's very famous in Israel, and he wrote an op-ed in the first few days of the war that I think encapsulated what the majority of Israelis feel. And he wrote that the state of Israel was not established, he wrote an article that encapsulated what majority of Israelis feel. And he wrote that the state of Israel was established so the Jews will not have to hide again in closets and basements in order not to get murdered. If you ask why Israel went on this counteroffensive, that's the reason. That's the reason. Israel is a country that, young kids learn from, from elementary school, that one of the lessons that they need to remember is never again, okay, not a second Holocaust, and always be able to defend yourself. So October 7th touched exactly that, because it made so many Israelis feel that, first, the never again happened, and they were defenseless. And I think this is something that, so when you ask, whether the Israeli government is concerned that it's losing support around the world, yeah, of course it's a concern. But the government right now, if it stops, the public anger would be so huge that it's hard to explain how big it's going to be.
Yeah. Now, to wrap up here, I want to bring this back to what you were noting at the beginning about the government's view of what comes next. And there have been a few pronouncements that we've had publicly from Israeli officials dismissing the idea of a two-state solution. Where does that stand at this point? What is the Israeli government's view of what comes after the war? And is there any idea of what the alternative to a two-state solution would be right now?
So I'll start answering your question through something you asked quite at the beginning about Joe Biden and his support for Israel. Because it's very interesting, because Joe Biden sort of created this multi-layer version. There's no doubt about his support for Israel, okay? think one of the, obviously one of the most supportive U.S. presidents in history. That's a fact. There's no doubt that he supports the goal of destroying Hamas and dismantling its military and governmental capabilities in Gaza, although he differs from Netanyahu about how to do it. But then the third layer is his approach to Netanyahu's government, which is the most right-wing government in Israel's history, that has in it racist, xenophobic, Jewish supremacist politicians. And when it comes to that layer, Biden makes clear that, while he supports the first two layers, the third layer is something completely different. So, he differentiates between his support of Israel and his support of the government. And then, again, going back to your last question, there is a huge gap between where the U.S. would want this to go. U.S., by the way, Israel's allies in the region, Israel's allies in Europe, they all want to destroy Hamas, but they want it on the day after there will be a political process, that will be a wider context to this thing, that peace process will resume, peace talk between Israel and the Palestinians will resume. Division. Nobody's even talking about this happening tomorrow, but at least going back to the vision of a two-state solution, back to the path that might lead there in a few years, not tomorrow. And the Israeli government is in a totally different place. Okay? The policy of the Israeli government is not to strengthen the Palestinian Authority in order to go on a path that maybe, in a decade would lead to a Palestinian state. The policy of the Israeli government is to destroy the Palestinian Authority so that the two-state solution will not be a viable solution. Okay? Big parts of the Israeli coalition, ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir, an ultra-nationalist, Jewish supremacist, Bezalel Smotrich, a racist who called to wipe out and burn Palestinian villages in the West Bank. They're not going to support two-state solution. They want to kick out the Palestinians to Jordan. Right. Or those from Gaza, they want to kick them out to Egypt. They are members of Likud, Netanyahu's party, who are even sometimes being called moderates, okay? That wrote op-eds that say, let's encourage Palestinians from Gaza to immigrate to Europe. We will pay them for the ticket, okay? So when those are the voices inside the Likud, not the radical right-wing parties, the Likud. So you see that there's a huge gap, and I think this is where there'll be a clash between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government. By the way, if it stays in power.
Right.
The day after the war in Gaza is not only in Gaza, it's also in Israel. And I think there is a good chance that we'll see this, once the fighting moves to low-intensity fighting, the politics will go to high-intensity politics. And there's huge anger. As I said, 80% of the Israelis want Netanyahu to resign. It's a number, I don't know if it's even reversible. It's like you get to that point, that's it. It's just a matter of time until you go home. So I think that it will be very interesting to watch Israeli politics in the coming months. The grassroots movement that demonstrated against the judicial overhaul, the constitutional coup that Netanyahu wanted to push during the war, it morphed into a civil society movement to help those affected by the war in southern Gaza and in southern Israel and in northern Israel. There are, I think, more than 100,000 Israelis that were displaced because of the war. And all of those people that were displaced, believe me, they're pretty angry about the government. And I think that on the day after, which is not far away, we will see those demonstrations that we saw before the war over the Supreme Court. We'll see them, but much bigger, much stronger, and with a different slogan. from a slogan of democracy to a slogan of Netanyahu needs to go.
Barak Ravid, thank you so much for coming on the interview. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Interview. Please subscribe to The Interview on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. And check out coverage of our conversation with Barak Ravid on Mediaite.com.